Welcome to the podcast hosted by timecamp.com on how to stay on top of your work.
This is Stay on Top of Your Work podcast brought to you by Timecamp. Here we talk about all the things you need to know about time management, leadership, project management, and productivity. Welcome to the 27th episode. This is Kate, your host. And my guest today is Rick Morris, a project manager and internationally recognized speaker, owner of R Square Consulting, host of the Work-Life Balance Show, and the author of 4 books about which we are going to talk about. Thank you, Rick, for joining me here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So can you tell us your story? How did it happen that you became involved in project management world?
Absolutely. So, my father was a project manager, had no idea. But he had started a software company in the early 70s and one of the first companies to automate an insurance claim on a computer. And he actually wanted me to take over the business. And of course, I was rebelling. I was going to be a radio television broadcaster, and I was going to do something else. And when I lost my dad at 19, I just kind of fled and did a series of different jobs, wound up in IT. And somebody, like most project managers, just tapped me and said, you're a project manager now. But I was blessed to have some phenomenal mentors who taught me the right way of doing things. And I fell in love with the profession and have been doing it and speaking as an evangelist for the last 20 years on the topic.
Keep going.
Yeah. Well, what was funny, though, coming back to my dad is like, boy, I sure showed him, because I remember at one point I was doing a contract for an insurance company as a project manager, and it hit me. I was like, I'm doing exactly what my dad wanted me to, but I just took my own path to get here. It's like, I showed you, Dad, I'm a project manager now.
So it's like a family business a little bit.
I guess so. I guess I was raised to think like a project manager and had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. So do you use any tools in your work, any methodologies or strategies? Because I know there are some people who believe that using methodologies is not a good idea. What's your point on that?
Well, methodologies are a guidebook. There's so many people who do it poorly or wrong because they'll think, like the PMBOK, for example, through PMI, they think that is a script, and it's not. It's a series of tools designed to help you pick and choose what's going to be best for individual projects. And so, yeah, we're versed in all the methodologies and certified in all of them. But what we're seeing too is it's happening on the Agile side. So people want to understand Agile, want to learn Agile, so they go get these Agilists and they say, nope, you've got to do this strictly top to bottom this way, and nothing is subscribed that way. A methodology is a guidebook. It's like your driver's education handbook. You don't do everything in it, but you kind of should, but sometimes you don't. It's the same thing. So we do use a variety of methodologies. We subscribe to hybrid more than anything now. But we use all kinds of tools. Like one of my favorites is PERT, which is Program Evaluation Review Technique. Now, the problem is when you get certified in that, they just tell you to memorize a formula. What they do a poor job of is teaching you how to use that in your daily life. So if you see one of my contracts are completely PERTed out. And so when I go to a client, I give them a best case, most likely worst case. I don't just say, we're going to be done in 6 months and it's 20 grand, right? We kind of PERT all of that out. So we use all those tools as you should.
So what about some technological tools, like some kind of software or something like that? Do you think it's useful?
It's absolutely, you can't do it today without software. And we ask a question all the time to our executives, which is, what percentage of your staff is available to do projects? And if you don't know that, the second question is, how many project managers per project, do you have? And so every company has too many projects, not enough project managers. So they tap people to do that. But the biggest thing that they do is they pick their projects based on what they can spend, right? So they'll get a $30 million budget and they break down how they're going to spend it, but they have no idea whether or not they have the resourcing to achieve that. And, so what happens is people do spreadsheets and all this other stuff. But the moment you do a spreadsheet, it's out of date. So having an integrated tool in which you can communicate with each other, you can see everything that's going on. There are real-time updates and you're getting a single source of the truth. That's the only way to really know whether or not you're going to be successful in what you've chosen to do.
Okay, so I'd like to switch a little bit to a different topic, of course, connected with project management. What do you think about being a project manager in a large company, in a large corporation, versus being a project manager in a small organization? Are there any differences, and what are the
Oh yeah.
challenges maybe?
Yeah, tons of challenges. That's a great question. If you're in a large company, what I see happen often is that it's more failure avoidance than seeking success. Meaning, every time a major failure occurred at that company, they create a new system, a new checklist, a new thing for them to do, all to prevent that from happening again. But the why of that kind of gets lost in translation as people move on and as people leave the organization. So the organizational politics in a large company is just brutal. You've got multiple people with multiple agendas, and if you can't figure that out, you're gonna get destroyed as a project manager. Perfect example that we actually worked for a Fortune 5 company, and when we went in, they had a process they wanted us to automate. We determined it cost $8 million a year to run that process. And so our question was, do you have $16 million a year in benefits from running this process? If not, let's not automate it. Let's just get rid of it, right? There's no value in this process. And they fired us, right? Because the person that wanted us to come in wanted us to make his process better, but he was in charge of the process. Right. And so when you're in a large organization, how much waste goes on because people are being protectionist of their jobs, their territory, or what they think, it's not for the good of the company. On the flip side of that, when you go small company, while you can try a bunch of things, you normally have to wear many hats. Right. So this is where my great friend Colin Ellis says it best when he says, he'll look at a job description and says, I need a project manager, must have SharePoint experience. He's like, you need a SharePoint administrator. You're not looking for a project manager. And so when you're in a small company, it tends to you tend to do a lot more things that aren't project management related, or the culture itself maybe bucks against that. So there's challenges on both sides. It's all, though, I think about positioning and influence more than anything. Right. So regardless of all that stuff, I think influence is what a project manager really needs to develop to be successful in either organization.
Okay, so what I'm thinking about is a relationship in a company between a team and stakeholders. How can we do it in order to be, good, to create good relationships?
Yeah. Well, I think the number one relationship period is that of your sponsor, you and your sponsor, and whether or not you've built a relationship. I always say most projects start with a lie, and that's because the project manager will come up with a budget, and then they'll just lump 10 or 15 or 20% on top, knowing that the sponsor is going to cut it. And so the game becomes, can I outpad the cut of the budget instead of having an honest conversation, which I think is very, very important. So that essentially subscribes the relationship to playing games and trying to outwit each other versus being a team and really making decisions together. So I think how you approach that is a huge piece. The second thing, and it was really a breakthrough in my career, is that Rob Tomset wrote a book called Radical Project Management. In that, he has a quote that says, projects fail because of context, not content. And so I think to really focus on the right relationship, it's that with the sponsor, and you're protecting your team by doing so. So, for example, how many project managers out there are assigned a project with the date and with the budget, and they just accept it? Right? They just, okay, I guess this is what they want. And immediately you need to start building your influence to find out where the wiggle room is. So I ask questions like, why this date, right? Is it first to market strategy, or is there a regulatory option? And there may be. And so you're like, okay, now I understand the date. But then I flip that to, all right, well, what's the penalty if we miss the date, right? Because that's establishing my budget. On the flip side of that, you'll get, well, we just want it done in the third quarter. And so my next question is, well, if the fourth quarter is delivered, but it's really good, is that okay? I mean, I just need to know where my wiggle room is, right? So by establishing that and starting to ask great questions of your sponsors and really doing it with your intention to make them successful, then you'll grow that influence, and then your team benefits from that, because we're not working nights and weekends for some arbitrary date that doesn't matter, right? And your team will see that you're protecting them, and it grows the influence in both directions.
Okay, so what about creating that strong culture in a company? How can we achieve that?
So I think it's small wins, right? Small things lead to great change. And so we actually turned a culture around at a bank when I was running a PMO from a very IT centric, driven by the IT process to a teamwork. But when I got there, it was very contentious, and it was a rule by fear CIO. They had all these systems that nobody really wanted to use, and so what most people do is complain, and so they'll I don't like this. I want to change this, or they'll use a project failure to try to change it. What we've noticed is that if you model the behavior that you want and do it in a way, just your team, like you can come to your project team and go, look, for this project, we're going to do it this way. Let's try it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, no. But when you start to build momentum of wins, so for instance, there was 7 PMOs at the bank. Ours was the only one that was consistently hitting dates. And most people start asking questions like, how are you doing that? Like, how are you navigating the process? And it was through winning, not complaining, that we were able to start those conversations. And I think most people complain and then wait for a failure and then use that as a stick to try to change an organization. That's not going to change the culture. So I think the key is modeling the behavior of what you want, focusing on small wins, and bringing people along through a success cycle is the way to change.
Okay, so what I'm thinking also about is do you have, from your own experience of working with people, any examples of mistakes that people usually do in project management?
Oh yeah, I mean, my whole career is built on mistakes, and I think that that's important as a project manager. If you meet a project manager who says they've never failed at a project, then they don't know what they're doing. I've made tons of mistakes. I've made mistakes in again not pushing back on a date. I've made mistakes in reading a situation, and most of my mistakes, when I look back at it, were fueled by ego. My ego and making sure that I wanted certain things, done a certain way. And really, when I really look at the core of that, I wanted to feel important. I wanted to make myself important. And once you can start to drop that ego and realize that your job as a project manager is to make the sponsor look fantastic and to protect your team, then it'll come along with you, right? They'll pull you up versus you trying to make political moves to make yourself stand out. I think the greatest lesson I've learned is just to be in the background, right? Promote the team. If people don't even know I'm there, I've done my job, right? And then people are going to start asking, how was it successful? What'd you do? And that kind of stuff. And then your teammates will bring you out. But yeah, I made tons of mistakes. I think that were ego driven, not communicating well, those types of things.
So being a project manager is actually about other people, not about you.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and 90% of your job is communicating. And so I always, project managers, we're a strange breed. And I speak for a living, but I meet so many project managers that think that once they have their certification, they're done, and there's no more learning. And the best project managers that I know, the greatest ones out there, are on a personal or self-development journey. They're reading, they're looking at their blind spots, they're improving their personalities at every step of the way. They're learning about disc profiles and Myers-Briggs and how to read your team and how to communicate effectively to your team. And the worst project managers are the ones that go, well, do it my way, or because I said so, or I'm the boss, don't worry about it. Or they're preventing communication from certain branches, right? Everything's got to come through me because I'm the almighty project manager. Those are the worst ones that I see out there because they're not successful. Disc profiles was huge in my career. Really understanding how to read people, how to deliver information to my sponsor in a way that they get it. There's 4 main ways to do it. And so I have to know which way I'm going to approach. And once I did that, and once I learned that, then I started to see, again, my success rate grow. But yeah, project managers need to really focus on the betterment of their team and making their sponsors successful. It has nothing to do with them.
Okay, so when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about being passionate about your work.
Oh yeah.
Is it possible to be passionate about your work as a project manager? Because I know I have a friend who's actually not passionate and she hates it, but she's still into that. How do you do it, for example?
Yeah. Well, you got to match. You got to find your purpose, and when you're working every day and it's fulfilling the purpose that you know you were driven to do, passion's inevitable. Um, I am very passionate. In fact, I work with a lot of different vendors, and when I'm selling their systems, they feel I'm more passionate about it than they are. But I am, because I know that if we do things a certain way and we get people communicating, that the organization's going to thrive. I won't name the name, but I worked with a technology company. They brought us in to build their PMO. There were 150 IT employees, and they had one facet of the business. Now they're everywhere. You can't buy anything on Amazon, or you can't do anything with your cell phone without them being involved. We were there for that growth. And when you have successes like that, passion becomes natural. And so I have a passion. My personal passion is to truly make project management indispensable. My personal passion is when a organization realizes they have too many projects and not enough project managers, they either cut the projects or they go hire real project managers. They don't just dole it off to somebody else, right? How many people know a CFO that's going to walk around at the end of the fourth quarter and go, I need help closing my books. You know math. Come help me. No, they go get accountants. And they say, why? Well, accountants are a certified profession. These are people who've studied accounting their whole life. Well, project management's the exact same way. There's certifications, you study for it, you grow into that profession. But for some reason, right now where our profession stands is, well, anybody can be a project manager. And it's so frustrating. It's so, because there's people out here who are making that their profession, making that their passion. So to throw that away is frustrating.
Yeah, that's true. So you are the host of the show Work-Life Balance. And I'd like to ask you two questions related to that show. The first one is, how do you find your work-life balance? And the second one is, what have you learned from your guests on that show? Because I
Oh
guess there
wow.
were many interesting people there. And
Oh yeah. So first, how do I find my own work-life balance? It's again, if you match your passion, right, to what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work. So there's times where, it's work, it's tedious. I got to run the company. I've got to do certain things and certain tasks. But most of the time, I'm having so much fun doing it. The company that I built has people that I love and have worked with for years. We're friends. We hang out outside of work, right? So when I'm sitting in the office with in fact, my chief operating officer, I've known him 20 some odd years. And so when we're sitting in the office, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like two of us are just hanging out. And by the way, we got a task to do, right? That's when you found a work-life balance. Now, as far as the show is concerned, I've been doing it 3 years now. So, I mean, I've had Rob Tomset on, who is an idol to me. We had Scott Ambler on, who founded Discipline Agile. Just last week, I had this wonderful person, Melissa Agnes, who talks about having your organization be crisis ready. I have I'm an executive director of the John Maxwell team, so I bring a lot of those people on that talk about leadership and fulfillment. So I personally, that's like my personal hour of learning. Every time I do the show, I always just bring guests that I'm interested in knowing more about and want to hear their platform, and I learn a ton. And I'll often end up working about an hour after the show, implementing ideas that I just heard. Like with Melissa, we had a situation, and I followed her advice as soon as the show was over. So to me, it's we're trying to bring really good content to people, expose them to different things. I had a psychic on the show once, and she was fascinating. I went into it like whatever. She was fascinating the way she thought and communicated. And so that's the way the show works. And we call it work-life balance, so I can bring anybody I want on the show. But it's a lot of fun to do.
that's great. That's really inspiring. So let's switch also to that more creative part, books, which I
Oh yeah.
personally love. You are the author of 4 books. So I'd like to ask you, what inspires you to write those books?
Initially it was to be able to get on stage, to go speak, right, and to lend credibility to that. But I'm finding that you reach your audience in multiple different ways, and so a lot of people like that tangible book. And it's interesting because it becomes like a diary in a way. So I'll give you an example. When I wrote Project Management That Works, I wrote that in 2008. Looking back at it now, I've changed quite a bit and changed a lot of my beliefs. Now, a lot of the book is still core and solid, but now when I get on stage and do a seminar about it, I actually tell them, all right, I'm teaching you the way I wrote it in the book in 2008, but let me tell you how I've evolved since then and what I think about it now. And so it's really interesting. And sometimes you'll go back and read it and go, I don't even remember writing that. I was in some sort of zone or something. But they're a lot of fun. So I've collaborated on 2 additional books, one of those being the Agile Almanac that just came out. And then I'm under contract right now. We're negotiating the final details to write a book called The Work-Life Balance. So, protecting your team at all costs. So that's what we're doing now. But it kind of just forces you to sit down and organize your thoughts about growth. And again, coming back to modeling the behavior, right? So instead of just saying, I think you should do this, and my first inspiration of that came from when I was watching somebody at PMI, and they had written a book, and everything was do it because I said so. And I couldn't apply any of the concepts into my job as just a lowly project manager. And so I wanted to create a voice that says, here's how you model the behavior and how you change an organization, no matter where you sit on the organizational chart.
So what about the books that you read? Do you have any favorite positions?
Yeah. I read at least 2 books a week. And so my favorite, Maxwell, obviously, I'm executive director of his team. But I joined his team because the inspiration of his books. But right now I'm reading No Limits by John Maxwell. I'm reading Seth Godin's. He's got What to Do When It's Your Turn. Stephen Pressfield's War of Art is a beautiful book. I've read that multiple times, but if you're a creative person at all, you need to read War of Art. So those are the things, but I mainly read leadership and personal development books now.
Okay.
Positive Intelligence by Shazar Charmaine. Those are all just fantastic books to invest in.
Okay, that's great. So I've got 2 or maybe one last question to you related to the name of the podcast. How do you stay on top of your work? And also, do you maybe have any tips for our audience? How to always be, a good project manager?
Absolutely. And all of my tips in terms of work-life balance can be found in my book, No Day But Today. In what I learned was all of the skills that I apply in managing projects, I could apply to my personal life. And so I'll give you just an example out of that. Analyzing my stakeholders in my work-life balance. So I'm a father of 2, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, a business owner, a boss. And so what I've done is when I do my goal setting, it's not just like 3 goals. I build goals in each one of those categories and then break that down into something I can achieve today to advance that role, right? So I sit down with my son and daughter and I'm like, well, I want to be a present father. What's present mean to you? And when I get that, then I can start to, put things together to make sure I'm fulfilling that promise to them. So it's taking a scope statement, breaking it down into daily activities and making sure that you're fulfilling all your different roles, not just work or life, right? So that's how I do it.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much for the interview. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
This podcast was brought to you by Tancam. You can listen to it on iTunes and SoundCloud. Subscribe to get more content and always stay on top of your work.